Hey guys, it's Emily, and this is my new series where I bring you out on my hikes and into my trail journal. In May of 2020, my boyfriend Nic and I hiked 40 miles on the River to River Trail in southern Illinois, our first ever backpacking trip. And this is my trail journal on the experience. But before I get into that, there are two major things to address. So first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic because we did this hike during that, and we only did it because we felt that we could do it safely, and we took a lot of precautions. So if you have any questions about that, just leave a comment, message me. I'd be happy to tell you a little bit more in detail about that. Since the pandemic is still currently going on, numbers are rising, we will be taking all of these same precautions on any trails we go on in the future, which will be here in Colorado now since we just recently moved, and we took precautions doing that as well. I mean, I haven't really left the house in over a week now, so I'm really excited to get back out there after I'm done isolating. So, and then I also wanted to talk about the Black Lives Matter movement in relation to this hike. It took place within days of the murder of George Floyd, and the protests and everything starting to happen, and it's not going to be present in this video. It just wasn't immediate with us on trail, and that's really just because we have the privilege as white people to not have to think about that. When we go out on trail, we can just leave that all behind, but that's really not what should be happening. And as I've learned since this hike, there is just a lot of interconnectedness between the Black Lives Matter movement and the outdoors and the environment. It's all just interconnected, and racism doesn't disappear when you get on trail. I mean, people of color still have to deal with that on trail. So I'm going to leave a link down below for some organizations that are promoting diversity in the outdoors, since it's just really important to make everyone feel safe on trail. And then just some other links, I think, for organizations that I've donated to, or just if you don't have the money to donate, just some general resources for how you can help, because this movement is still going on and we can't back down or give up. So with all of that in mind, let's continue. Day 1, Friday, May 29th, 17 miles. We started at the Ohio River in Elizabethtown, E-Town to the locals, around 11 a.m. We saw the sign, touched the water, and we were off. Originally, our goal was to do 90 miles in 5 days to the recently reopened Ferncliff State Park, but we decided to play it safe and go for 50 miles in 4 days to Eddyville. No sweat. That was my thought, at least. We'll probably end up pushing to Ferncliff anyway. Yeah, right. But more on that later. First, we had to get through a bit of road walking, and honestly, I didn't mind much. The places along the road made it feel real, our first backpacking trip, and at the start, everything felt exciting. And soon enough, we entered the woods, which held mud and ticks, but also towering fir trees that made me think of the Pacific Northwest. Not that I've been out there yet, but I've probably seen enough CW shows to get what it looks like. Let's just pause here a moment to commemorate how beautiful these shoes were before they got decimated by the incredible amount of mud on this trail. Okay, anyway. The trail seemed to turn almost into a creek at this point, with all the water rushing down from the recent rainfall, which was mostly over by the time we hit the trail, thankfully. And I remember passing a sign for Shawnee National Forest, which was exciting. We were here, though we'd weave in and out of these signs over the next couple of days. Then we hit our first water crossing. Good luck! And we thought this was bad. Later in the day, we'd hit some wider, more intense creeks that came up almost to our knees, and then our shoes wouldn't dry for more than 24 hours later. One of the really great things about the river to river is that it uses old Forest Service roads like this one here, making for wider, easier to navigate trails. Unfortunately, the rest of day one featured a lot of narrow, overgrown trails, and that was just one of many unfortunate situations. The clips for day one end here because it honestly just got way too stressful to film. Our first and biggest mistake was skipping lunch. We really wanted to make our goal of High Knob at 17 miles, so we barely even stopped to snack. Then we were slowed down by narrow, overgrown trails where I saw 2 ticks on me in the span of 15 minutes. So for the rest of the trip, I was constantly checking myself. Then we hit those deep water crossings that left our shoes soaked till lunch the next day. Plus, I ended up falling in a muddy puddle blocking the trail, so my leg was covered in mud for the rest of the day. We should have quit around 11 or 12 miles where there was a beautiful campsite, but we still had a couple hours of daylight and it felt like we could easily trek a few miles. Huge mistake. This is the only good campsite until we hit High Knob. But we kept on, trekking through giant mud pits in the near darkness. I fell again, so even more mud on my leg. We finally got to camp just before we completely lost the light, but our troubles didn't end there. Past me will fill you in on that in a minute. First, we have to head into day 2. May 30th, and not 10 miles as I'm just now realizing, but 13, so made a nice ugly mark in my beautiful travel journal, but it happened, so let's move on. Good morning.
Good morning.
Are you chilly?
Yes.
Oh. This was our campsite for the evening. A mostly secluded clearing surrounded by trees atop a very mossy rock. And as much as I love a sunrise, it was just so peaceful and calming to wake up to the soft light filtered through the trees and the partly cloudy sky still harboring bits of purple and pink. I'd wake up like that every morning if I could. After we packed, we headed up to High Knob proper to take in this gorgeous view. And get our bearings after a pretty messy first day on trail. Alright, so we are at High Knob this morning. We just had breakfast, oatmeal. Things are not going awesome. We have had a lot of setbacks. We did way too many miles yesterday, 17, and we were hiking until like 8:30. It was dark and we were setting up camp and we hadn't eaten lunch and we could barely eat dinner. I put too much water in the bean dip for cold cooking, so it was basically just bean water. So we're having a little rough. Nick is not feeling well this morning. We might be calling it quits because he's just not having it, but at least we had a nice view for our breakfast and we had a really nice camp spot last night, so even though it was terrible getting to it, you know, it's going okay. We've enjoyed some of it, although every time I ask Nick how he's doing, it's not good. So we're also still soaking wet from yesterday. Our socks and shoes didn't dry at all, and our shoes are still covered in mud, so looking forward to our next water crossing to get that off, and then we'll just be wet for the rest of this trip, I guess. So yeah, that's really where we're at. But yeah, last night was definitely difficult. Yesterday was definitely difficult. A lot of knee pain, chest pain, all kinds of stuff, and then I just had a terrible time sleeping because I was hearing a lot of noises, just other people, because where we are is like near a horse campground, I believe, and just more populated area near roads, so I slept a little bit, and then I just kept hearing noises, and then I woke up because I thought I heard an animal wrestling with our stuff, and that freaked me out, and then I just got up and couldn't go back to sleep and was almost crying, and then I had to go pee and didn't want to go in the dark, so a lot to adjust to on our first backpacking trip, but it was still nice to wake up in the tent this morning, and we got to sleep under the stars last night. We didn't put the rain flyer on, which is cold, but we still had a good time, and hopefully we can push on, but we're not going to be dumb. We're going to get off trail if we're not feeling well, because don't want to injure ourselves or get sick. Every time Nick coughs, he thinks he's going to throw up, so yeah, that's really where we're at. Alright, so this is the kind of mud we've been dealing with. It's absolutely terrible, but you got all these horses coming through here, so they're stirring all this up, and it basically rained for the last 2 weeks, so here we are, trudging. Haven't given up yet, but we're also not to Garden of the Gods yet, so we'll see what happens, but here we go. More and more mud. Yeah, every time you think it's over, guess what? It's definitely not. So, but I promise it wasn't all just mud and pain. I mean, look at these awesome caves that stand directly beside the trail. We had a great time exploring them. Then we made it to Garden of the Gods and found it totally packed, which normally would be whatever, but amid COVID, quite concerning, especially with the lack of masks. But we found some picnic tables away from the crowds where we dried our socks and shoes on the horse tacks and started in on 2 of our meals, slightly overcompensating for the lack of food the day before. Both meals we dehydrated ourselves with recipes from the Backcountry Foodie. And if you're interested in dehydrating your own vegetarian burritos or pesto pasta, I'll leave the link below. If it wasn't already obvious, Nick was feeling much better, so our journey didn't end that day, which was great because I got to experience my favorite, well, one of my favorite parts of the trip. The rest of the Garden of the Gods wilderness. First, we passed by the best overlook Garden of the Gods has to offer, in my opinion at least. And then we entered what felt like a magical fairy tale wood. And maybe I'm being dramatic, but I was just in love with this part of the trail. Where the afternoon sunlight fell perfectly through the leaves. Pine needles hung from unreachable branches, and bark jutted just slightly off the trees. Anyone who ever overlooked Illinois because it lacked natural wonders needs to absolutely rethink, because this state will surprise you. But all good things must end, and this wondrous part of the trail ended as we made our way into Herod. And that's not to say that Herod is awful or anything like that. It's just a lot of road walking. It seemed to last forever, but forever was only about 2 miles. And like I said, it wasn't all bad. We spotted a blaze for the American Discovery Trail, marked that down as another long trail I've set foot on, though the list isn't very long. And along the latter half of the road, we glimpsed empty fields between the trees and a spooky old barn sparkling in the afternoon light. But maybe that's really only an upside for a horror fan like myself. And then we were back in the woods. Throughout the day, I'd been listening to The Hunger Games on audiobook, and it just felt like the perfect book for this setting. I often connect audiobooks with my feelings and surroundings in the moments I listen to them, and being in the trees, walking along the trail, it just felt like the right way to experience this book. Anyway, before I get off on a further tangent about books, let's get back to the hike. We'd planned to camp at One Horse Gap, which would have put day 2 at 15 miles, but after pushing ourselves on day 1, we decided to take it easy. When we reached the 170 overlook around 6 p.m. and 13 miles, we called it. There was still plenty of daylight to set up camp and cook dinner, plus we had a great view to enjoy for the evening. And now for our final day on trail, May 31st, 10 miles. It wasn't supposed to be our final day, but I awoke to some bad news. Nic had thrown up around 4 a.m., and although he was feeling fine a couple hours later as we set off under the leaves glowing in the early morning light, and who wouldn't feel good in those conditions, spending another night on the trail still didn't seem like the best idea. So we agreed to cut it short, make this our last day. We'd end our hike at a church in Bethesda rather than in Eddyville. 40 miles instead of 50 or 90 or even 170, and I was really okay with that. As much as I really wanted to make our goal, I also didn't want to put Nic at risk. And backpacking for the first time had definitely been tough for me too. So for once, I let go of my need to reach the finish line. We'd already made this huge accomplishment that I could take pride in. So, despite the sad news, we hiked on in high spirits. And our day got even better as we passed more and more impressive rock formations. It's like I said before, even in the so-called boring Midwest, even in the Plains state, there are some feats of nature that are just absolutely worth checking out. Like our next stop, Rocky Top, for instance, which isn't right along the trail like the map says, so make sure to keep an eye out because you do not want to miss this view. Being able to look out over this national forest that I had been hiking through, it was just the best feeling. And then we came to One Horse Gap, literally just a gap between two boulders big enough for a horse or two hikers to climb through, and also possibly the coolest feat of nature to be explored along the trail. After this, we entered a section of trail that I just wasn't too excited to film, simply because it seemed to drag on forever. It wasn't even a road walk this time, but we had taken a wrong turn along a part of trail that had been rerouted, so after getting back on track, I was getting extremely hungry. But unfortunately, there weren't any good spots to sit and eat along this section, so we just had to barrel through until we reached this trailhead where we finally settled in for Fritos and bean dip, one of our absolute favorites from the Backcountry Foodie. Before long, we were back to it. Only a couple miles left to go and still plenty of mud to trudge through. And just when I thought it would be easy, 1 mile from the end of our hike, we made a last stop to explore Concord Cemetery, which branches right off the trail. And even in such a sorrowful place, there was so much beauty. Wildflowers growing abundantly and a view of the farmland stretching out below. Then we moved on to the final stretch. And sure, we could have gotten picked up right here where the road began, but we were only at 39 miles. Not gonna cut it. So we suffered just a little. On the rocky road, in the sun, and up some hills. All to say we had walked 40 miles on the river to river trail, and it was absolutely worth it. And suddenly we were at the church, and our very first through hike was over. But this was only the beginning of my backpacking journey, and just one of many, many hikes. I'll be back on the trail soon for way more adventures, and plenty more to write about. But until then, thanks for watching.